What happened before no longer exists. What will happen next has not yet been written.
Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. This is a very special video I'm doing in honor of very easily one of my favorite all-time authors. I'd say she was in my top 3. So if you've seen my channel a lot, you'll know who the first 2 are. She's up there with them. She's such an important author. She's such an influential and significant person in literature anyway. But I absolutely love what she does personally. And I discovered her quite late. So I only discovered her about 6 years ago or something. 7 or maybe 8 years ago, I'm not sure, but something like that. But I was immediately blown away by what she did, and I got obsessed for a while, read loads, and now I'm a completist and I'll buy anything that I see by her. And I'm going to go through the 19 books and the box set I have by her, and I'll talk about her for a bit, and hopefully it might inspire you to read some of what she's done. And if you do already know her and you love her stuff, hopefully you'll feel like I've done her justice. So I'm talking about Ursula K Le Guin, born in Berkeley, California in 1929. She lived a long life until she was 88 and died, sadly, in 2018. I remember finding out about it, and that was, I just discovered her. And I was, you know, upset by the fact that I just discovered her. And I knew she was someone who did connect with her fans a lot, and she loved talking to them. She went to science fiction conventions a lot, but she died in 2018. But she's left behind an enormous, fantastic body of work, and a really interesting body of work that goes in all sorts of different directions, but there's lots of consistency. So she's called Ursula K Le Guin because the K, she always includes the K, and the K is her father, Krober. She grew up around his influence because he was a scientist and an anthropologist. And she said before in interviews how significant his part was to play in her development, in her interest in science and anthropology, and her kind of attitude to her science fiction. You can see how that is influenced by that. There's lots of other things as well. Her interest in Carl Jung and her interest in Taoism, and there's a character to her prose and to her stories that really speaks to me. So we share an interest in philosophy, an interest in ethics, and the way that humans act morally. She has an interest in dreams, and that plays out in some of what she writes. She's got a very consistent attention to identity and power politics, which plays out in some of what she's done. And again, that's something else I'm really interested in. And that idea of science being sort of built around that is also another really interesting thing. But she was writing, she kind of started writing in the late 50s, but she really came to people's attention and really made a difference from the late 60s. So really from 1969 to 1974 was where she wrote her most significant pieces of work. And that was really at the turn of a new period in science fiction. And she was part of that. And I'm going to mention a collection that she was part of that was part of that new voice in science fiction. So she was part of that. And ultimately, she grew up in a world of science fiction in the 40s and 50s that were dominated by men, and science fiction was pretty much adventure stories that were male dominated and that were grounded in the science of physics and planetary exploration and the cosmos and that kind of thing. Whereas she became part of a movement that expanded the definition of science in science fiction, and she brought psychology and social social political philosophy, if you like, social geography, human geography, and some of those social sciences, philosophy, ethics, all those things came into play in science fiction in a big way through what she was doing, and she was the best at it. And other people were doing the same thing. You know, some of her contemporaries were people like Samuel Delaney, who was doing some important things as well. I don't personally connect to the way he writes, and I absolutely connect to the way Ursula K Le Guin writes. I think it's beautiful, I think it's interesting, and I think it's compelling. So, if you are curious at all by any of these things, and if you've heard of some of the famous books like Left Hand of Darkness or something like that, then give her a go. You may have heard of the fantasy series that she created rather than the science fiction stuff, and I'll get to that in a minute. So, in 1966, she started the Hein Cycle with Ricannon's World, and I'm going to talk about the Hein Cycle here, and I'm going to reference the first time I ever discovered her, and I'm also going to reference this old box set. So I'm going to do that first before I get into the other things. So Hein Cycle is a significant piece of work where she's written, I think it's 8 novels and a bunch of short stories that are all based around a connected universe. So they're not sequels or prequels or anything like that. They're not connected in a really tight way, but they are connected in the sense that it is a world that she created that lived in the same universe, right? But each of those pieces of literature, either a novel or a short story, are its own separate thing. But the Hein Cycle contains some of her best work. So if you do get a chance to get this amazing box set, then this is a box set of the Hein Cycle, the Hainish stories, novels and stories. See that? So this is a really lovely box set. I haven't really had a reason to open it yet, so I haven't opened it. So it's still sealed, and I kind of feel like it'd be nice. I don't know why I really wanted it, and it's quite expensive, and it was a really important present. I don't really want to open it, but it contains all of the Hein Cycles. So it contains Ricannon's World, which was her first one, which she wrote in 1966. It contains Planet of Exile, City of Illusions, Left Hand of Darkness, The Dispossessed, The Word for World is Forest, 5 Ways to Forgiveness, The Telling, and then a series of short stories to finish off the box set. So that's all of the things that she released under the Hein Cycle. Okay. So if you're curious, if you want to just go dive in, then they're all collected there together in from Everyman, which is a really interesting publisher that makes these lovely box sets. So the first time I ever discovered her as a reader, so I actually properly read something by her, was The Word for World is Forest. And I absolutely loved it. I did actually recommend this to Alice in the Giant Bookshelf, and she didn't really like this a lot, but I said it's definitely worth reading other things because it could be a bit of a fluke, and you probably like Left Hand of Darkness, and you're probably like The Dispossessed, that kind of thing. So I'm hoping that she'll continue. But I love this, and it really, really turned me on to her straight away. It's quite short, and actually this first appeared in, again, Dangerous Visions. So like I said, I kind of alluded to this a minute ago when I said that she appeared in a collection of stories, an anthology that was part of this new reset button for science fiction, which was nicknamed New Wave, and Harlan Ellison's Dangerous Vision series is an important part of that. And he wanted to get Ursula K Le Guin in the Dangerous Vision series, and he had too many stories on hand for the first slot. But once he got again Dangerous Visions, which was the second one, he asked her to provide a story, and she provided. The word for world is forest, which, as you can see, is there. So it first appeared there, but I read it as part of the SF Masterworks, so it was quite a short book, but it's really, really good. It's got really important things to say about social responsibility and environmentalism and kind of humans trampling over other planets and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it's really cool, but it's part of the Hein Cycle. And one of the kind of concepts behind the Hein Cycle is the idea that humans developed outside Earth, and it's just a coincidence they're on Earth as well, but they developed on these different planets, this cluster of planets that were connected together. So they're humans, but they're not humans from Earth. So the Word for World as Forest was the first thing I read, and I had heard of The Left Hand of Darkness, so that was the next thing I read. And this is a significant piece of work for all sorts of reasons, but mainly because of the way it investigates gender, explores gender. Ursula K Le Guin said that she wanted to think about, if you take gender out of the equation, what is left? That's almost a direct quote. When you take gender out, what is left? So it's definitely questioning what purpose and meaning and characteristics do gender provide, and what happens when you get a species like you do in this book that doesn't have a static gender. So there's like a gender fluidity being explored in this book through pregnancy. So it's really interesting. But there's at the heart of this is a really, really lovely love story that develops and comes to fruition towards the end of the book, and it really means something. It really hits you when it starts kicking in, and it's beautiful. The prose is beautiful. The way she writes is beautiful, but the way that the book opens up, and once the characters start opening up, and you get this really lovely story at the heart of it through this long journey that the two characters have to make across this landscape, it absolutely draws you in. And within this story, outside of this relationship, you've got this exploration of gender, which has been hugely influential and is really important, still relevant today, possibly, potentially, arguably more relevant now than it ever has been, because you have actually got gender fluidity becoming part of everyday society now, and we're all dealing with this new conversation, if you like, about gender. So The Left Hand of Darkness is a fantastic read and really important and definitely worth reading, especially now, I think. So that was the second thing I read. And then I read The Dispossessed. The Dispossessed is probably my favourite Ursula K Le Guin book. It's basically sets up a utopia, and it uses that utopia to explore the difference between two potential political regimes. So she's exploring political philosophy with this book and basically comparing anarchism, which she's arguing as a utopia, and compares that to a capitalist society where there's an envoy trying to marry up the two communities, the two ways of living, in a way that they can communicate together and be joined politically. And it's so good because it doesn't look at these things with rose-tinted glasses. And although I think it's fair to say she was a progressive, it doesn't just paint anarchism in a 100% glorified light. I think it comes off better than capitalism does, but then I'd relate to that more. I wouldn't relate to it as much if capitalism came off better than anarchism. And if you're not aware of what anarchism is, anarchists and the idea of anarchy and anarchism is not what you may think it is if you're not familiar with these terms, as just sort of riots in the streets and no law and that kind of thing. It's more about ownership and communal decision making, and a lack of authority, and the politics being driven by mass decision making and mass consensus, that kind of thing. So that's where the principles of anarchism comes from. So it is linked to, anarchism is linked to socialism and communism, but it's slightly different. I don't know whether to do a video on that sort of thing one day, I don't know. But anyway, this really explores it well with a science fiction setting, with a really interesting story, with a character that's fully realised, and it's just brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. So The Dispossessed, definitely recommend it, and it's a great example of what science fiction can do, exploring political philosophy through a science fiction setting, futuristic alien setting. So the other books in the Hein Cycle, this is interesting, 4 Ways to Forgiveness, which also you can get as 5 Ways to Forgiveness, because she added another story later on, but I've got the 4 ways, and I think the box set is 5 ways, if I remember rightly. Yeah, so the other story is in this. But 4 Ways to Forgiveness is interesting because it explores slavery, and she attempts to put down in these stories the consequences of living as a slave, and kind of discusses the effects on individuals as well as on society. So it was really good. I have done a video on Ursula K Le Guin. I just talked about 5 books before on another video. I do talk a little bit more about this book in that video. But this is really good, and it is part of the Hein Cycle. And then these 2 books here, like City of Illusions, I haven't read this yet. So this is one of the early Hein Cycle books. So City of Illusions, it's a really cool version actually. Is it Corgi? I think it's a Corgi one. I can't quite see it. Or is it an Ace one? It's an Ace. Oh, it's an Ace book. And I love these little Ace books. So City of Illusions is one of her early ones. But this is actually an omnibus of the first 3. So this is Ricannon's World, Planet of Exile, and City of Illusions. So if you want to get the 3 small early Hein Cycle books together, you get Worlds of Exile and Illusion, and you get those first 3 books. So that's the Hein Cycle. So before I go on to other things, I need to cover the other thing that she wrote in the late 60s, which is hugely important, really significant, and that's the Earthsea books. So Tales from Earthsea is the first book in a trilogy that she did really early on, literally in the first few years of her writing. Between 69 and 74, you've got this big clump of important books, and 3 of the Earthsea books are in that small clump, and they really did change the landscape of fantasy. They are seen as classic for all the right reasons. You've got a main character called Ged, who discovers that he's got magical powers, and goes to wizard school, basically. So the concept of a wizard school pretty much starts here. He's a character with faults. He has to go through a growing up period through these books. It's a coming of age kind of thing, but it's very it's very deeply written with lots of nuance. It's not a kid's book. It is a kid's book, but it's not just a kid's book. I guess I'm saying, because it's so well written. There's lots of layers to it. There's a kind of a general thread about balance in these books, and in a way, the evil in the books is not some evil warlock or something, or some evil dark force, but it's kind of the evil of being imbalanced. So that's kind of explored. So again, there's a lot of psychology in this, and Ged's journey is a really unique one in a way, but it does have a huge influence, and famously the Harry Potter books have been accused of plagiarizing them, and there are lots of links, so you can see why people say that. So there's many, more links than I've just said. So there's already some links, but there's all sorts of links. Whether that's coincidence or not, don't know. That's up for you to decide. But this is a lovely collection of the first 4 books, and eventually there was 6 books in the Earthsea books, but the first trilogy were the ones that had an enormous impact at the time. So you've got the Earthsea stories, you've got the Hein Cycle, you've also got the Orsinian Tales. Now, the Orsinian Tales are stories that are set in Orsinia, and this is a made-up country that she created that is kind of set in the real world, Central Europe ish. So the idea is that it's that kind of a place, and she explores identity and political philosophy and relationships within the stories in the Orsinian setting. And this is a collection of when the stories have been put together in this book, but ultimately they were kind of published separately, because what happened was she released a bunch of novels, and then for loads of the rest of her career after 1974, she kept releasing short stories on their own in different publications. And then you've had these collections. The next few things I'm going to talk about are all collections of short stories that were published separately. So she did return to Orsinia a number of times, and then you can get this book where she's got these Orsinian tales together. So there's some really good stories in here, like Brothers and Sisters is really good. What else? Imaginary Countries, Conversations at Night, The Road East. Yeah, really, really interesting stories. They are more down to earth, but they are just brilliantly written, and again, they explore humanity in a really profound way, as she does. And I tell you what, before I talk about more short stories, because these are short story collections, I need to mention this amazing book, which is The Lave of Heaven. This is one of her best books, I think, and again, I mentioned earlier that she was influenced by Carl Jung, and you can see that here with her exploration of dreams. But I've seen in interviews her talk about how she believed that we were capable of creating our present and our future, and she kind of plays with that a little bit with someone who, when he dreams, it becomes reality, and his therapist manipulates that. I think it's one of her best. It's slightly different from the others in the kind of storytelling, the setting, the premise, but it's so her, because of the way it explores like a power relationship, and it does explore political philosophy in a lot of the book as well. So yeah, Lave of Heaven, really, really recommended. So we've got a bunch of short stories here, and as we go on to the short stories, it's worth me mentioning a story that she wrote in 1973, which has become hugely famous and really influential and popular for all the right reasons. Fantastic story called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omulas, and that came out in 1973, and it's actually put out in this collection, the Wind's 12 Quarters, as well as the real and the unreal. So this is a 2-volume set of short stories, again, because she just brought out lots and lots of short stories, anthologized in different places or published in different places. And these are where they've been collected together. So the Wind's 12 Quarters, if you can get hold of those, that's good. And then there's the Real and the Unreal. And the thing with this collection, you've got volume 1, which is the more reality-based stories. So the Orsinian Tales are in there, or some of the Orsinian Tales are in there. And then volume 2 is the Unreal, which is more the science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction stuff, which includes the ones who walk away from Omelas. You know, her short stories are awesome, so definitely worth checking out these. And these are the Real and the Unreal series is quite, I don't know how available it is in other countries, but in the UK you can find this really, really easily. Often it's on the shelves in the big stores, but you can often find it in FOP for 7 quid as well, at HMV. This is a really popular book. This is a really interesting novel with lots of other things in it, like songs and poems and more straightforward prose that you'd expect in a novel. So Always Coming Home is quite a unique piece of work. It's big, but it's for some people it's their favourite Ursula K Le Guin piece of work. So really interesting collection of different techniques in the same book here. Lots of world building, and again, lots of exploration of how we live and how we think and our relationships. This is a funny one. This is a book that was originally called, what was it originally called? Yeah, this was originally called The Beginning Place, came out in 1980, and it was published again called Threshold. So this is separate from the other books, and I haven't read this one, but this came out in 1980, Threshold. So I need to get to that. And then you've got another reality-based book here. This is historical fiction, so this is very different from Ursula K Le Guin, Lavinia. So again, I haven't read this one, but like I said before, if I see anything by her, I'll get it. So Lavinia is historical fiction, and I will be reading that at some point. So to be fair, let me know if you've read Lavinia. It's different from the others. I tend to read the science fiction fantasy stuff first, but I'm going to read the Orsinian Tales, obviously, and I've read some of those already anyway, but I haven't read Lavinia. And then this is another collection of her short stories called The Birthday of the World. So this was a lovely find. It's a really nice copy, actually, and one of the few examples I have of deckled edges. This is a nice collection. These are stories from the 90s, so getting more up to date with this one, The Birthday of the World. And then the other book I've got to show you, and this is definitely something that you should definitely look into if you're interested in the stuff, and that's non-fiction. So this is a book called Dreams Must Explain Themselves, which is a fantastic essay. But there's another essay in here called something like Does Gender Matter? Is it there? I've got to get one. Is gender necessary? You know, she explores all sorts of things in her non-fiction, and her non-fiction is really interesting and definitely worth reading. So Dreams Must Explain Themselves is definitely worth checking out as well. So if you don't know her stuff, then have another look at the video, see if there's something that catches your eye, and give her a read. Look her up in the library, because she is very, very special. She's a significant name in science fiction and significant name in fantasy, because the Earthsea books, she's goes beyond that. She's respected as a writer regardless of the genre. She became a Grand Master of science fiction in 2003. She was the second woman to become a Grand Master of science fiction after Andre Norton. Others have since then, but it's no it's not a surprise that she was given that accolade, the Grandmaster of Science Fiction. She's won 8 Hugos, 6 Nebulas, and 24 Locus Awards as well. So that's not as big as Hugos and Nebulas, but still a significant amount of Locus Awards as well. So hugely important name, definitely worth checking her out. Yeah, let me know what you think of her in the comments below. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay curious.
Paint me a picture